So first, make sure you guys have 3 of your quizzes on your desk. You should have the 1.9 quiz where we did inverse functions, 3.1 where we did exponentials, and 3.2 where we started logarithms. So make sure that you received all of those. And today is our test review, or at least our test review for the first half of this unit. Remember, we really also want to do 3.3 and 3.4, but instead of moving on to those and then having one big 100-point test, we are cutting it off right here and going to stop and have a 50-point test, and then we'll go back and finish 3.3 and 3.4. So, the things that you need to look over and make sure that you are good with are the test review, but only the questions that I asked you to work last class, which was 1 through 9 and 11. The other questions from there are not, you're not going to be responsible for on the first half of this test. And in just a minute, I will take those questions from you since you already have that worked. And then I will let you look over your 1.9 quiz, see if there's anything you want to ask, then your 3.1, and then finish off with your 3.2. There's also one announcement I have up here, and I need to check this on Google Classroom real fast. Okay, yeah, I gotta change that. So we're getting kicked out of here for some testing, ELPA testing, next Wednesday. I thought it was Monday. They've said 2 different things, but I'm getting kicked out Tuesday and Wednesday. Only affects y'all on Wednesday. And we will be in room 1105. So I did put that in Google Classroom already, but I accidentally said Monday since that's what they told me the first time. So I will go back and change the Monday to a Wednesday, but it is here on the agenda. The room number is also on Google Classroom, so that morning you may want to pull those up as a quick reminder about where to go. And that is Mr. Williams' room, if you guys know where that is. First floor of phase 2. And that'll just be for one class though. Okay, so let me give you a moment here to get your test review out and see if there's any of those questions you'd like to ask. And we'll start with those and then move on to the quizzes. And so this can be very, very, very easy class period for you guys today, but it really just depends on how you did on your quizzes and how much more time you're going to need to put into that. So, they're on the bottom of the bookshelf. If you can't find it, just let me know. Okay, so I will have you finish the test review at some point after we've done section 3.3 and 3.4. 3.4 is all about solving equations, some more difficult ones, and 3.3 is about expanding and condensing logarithms. If that sounds familiar from Algebra 2. That's the other logarithm things we review. Okay, so from your test review, only questions 1 through 9 and 11, those are the only questions that would be fair game for your 50-point test next class. So which of those would you like some help with? Nothing from the test review? There is one question there that is something that's on the test review that didn't make the quiz. So that's good if y'all know how to do it. But just like last semester, I still think looking over your quizzes and the questions you missed is your single best resource, but then your test review would be next up. So if something's on the test review, it's certainly fair game for the test. Alright, then since you just got your 1.9 quiz back this morning, let me pause for a moment and give everyone a couple minutes to scan through that and see if there's anything you want to ask from that. Even though 1.9 will be on the test, I would say of our 3 sections, 1.9 is certainly the least important. The exponential and logarithmics will be weighted much heavier than the 1.9 inverse functions. Okay, so this one was a little bit shorter, less stuff for you to look over, but knowing what it means to be one-to-one, know how to take a point on a function and move it around to make it a point on the inverse, how to find the inverse given a function, how to prove that 2 functions are inverses with composition, again explaining what it means to be one-to-one, and what an inverse function would need to look like visually. So if you have questions from 1.9 quiz, you'll need to tell me which form you have as well. But I'm ready for those questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
Form A, question 6.
Number 6. Okay. A number 6. Okay. And this is the same as number 7 on the other 2 forms. So. Alright, sketch the graph of an odd function that does not have an inverse function. Okay, so many correct answers here, but to be a function, your final answer needs to pass the vertical line test. So whatever you put down on your paper, if you drew vertical lines, it can hit your graph at most once. So if that's not true, your answer cannot be correct. To not have an inverse function means that he fails the horizontal line test. So this is a function, but this guy's inverse is a function because he passes the horizontal line test. So you needed to make something that's a function, passes the vertical line test, but did not pass the horizontal line test. So that would be another way that your answer could be off. And then definitely the hardest part here, but I think on our practice quiz we did in this section, I think we did this exact same thing. To make it odd though, it has to have symmetry to the origin. So your graph has to look the same way, right side up or exactly upside down, 180-degree rotation. So this does not work because this flipped upside down would look like this. Those two do not look alike. So a close answer would be x cubed. X cubed is odd. He's symmetric to the origin. I can turn this upside down and it still looks the same. He is a function because he passes the vertical line test, but this one was not quite good enough because he also passed the horizontal line test, which means his inverse would be a function. And we're trying to find one that does not have an inverse function. So what we did on the practice quiz is if you just make this loop a little bit and then be consistent here so that you've got that symmetry that you need. Now this is an odd function because it has origin symmetry. It's a function because it passes the vertical line test, and its inverse is not a function because it does not pass the horizontal line test. So that's not the only answer, but that is a good one. Oh, also a few people threw this one out, and I didn't even really think about this, but if you pulled in stuff from last semester, an odd function, one of the odd functions we learned was the sine graph. So I saw a few people do this. This is an odd function. Oh, it's a function. It's certainly odd. It's got the right type of symmetry, and we memorized to death that sine was an odd function last semester. But his inverse is not a function because he doesn't pass the horizontal line test. So that was another option for that. But this is certainly the hardest part. You had to make a graph that had that symmetry for it to be correct. Okay, anything else from 1.9? Anybody else? Okay, so again, that's the least important, but of course anything you missed on that quiz is very likely to be on the test, so make sure that you clear that up. Okay, next up, let's move on to 3.1 where we did exponential functions. So being able to determine if a function would be exponential growth or decay without a calculator, graphing an exponential function, naming a bunch of stuff about it, describing the transformations, using the half-life formulas, picking out graphs from transformations, the horizontal asymptote stuff, and the compound interest formulas. So quite a bit more to 3.1 than there is to 1.9, but take a couple minutes to look at your mistakes and see which ones you can't figure out on your own. But I'll give you a few minutes to look that over. Okay, so same thing. You will need to tell me which form you had and which question you want to look at. So of course, some of the mistakes you may have made, probably some easy fixes, so you're still welcome to ask those questions if you'd like to. But on top of that, which ones would you benefit from a quick reteach on? Nothing from 3.1? Okay. Then finally, 3.2 is certainly, in my opinion, the hardest of the three because it has the most information. Also, it's just logarithms. You just, unfortunately in math, you don't get to use them a little bit all the time. So you kind of forget these things. But let me give you a few minutes to look that over and start to figure out which questions you want to ask about from there. But just as a quick 30-second snapshot, we've got switching from logarithmic form to exponential form. We've got some of the properties, graphing the logarithmic graph and describing the graph, picking out graphs using transformation rules, a couple of equations to solve, but real basic ones, not like the ones on the test review that are more complex that we'll do later. Knowing that inverse functions and exponential functions are inverses of each other. Evaluating logarithms, and then describing transformations given a function. So let me give you a few minutes to figure out what you need to ask from that. And then I will see what you got. Okay, so on 3.2, I would say probably one of the more costly mistakes was in question number 2, all those property questions. If you thought your answer had to be a number and you didn't put X's in some of your answers, then that certainly made you miss a few points. You certainly can't have X in your answer. These are not equations you're solving. You're not trying to figure out how big X is. You're just trying to simplify those things. But whatever you guys have, again, you'll need to tell me which form you have and which questions you want to look at. But again, for most people, this is where you'll need to spend the bulk of your study time. This is also, unfortunately, the one section that's going to carry over quite a bit to the next 2 sections. If you don't know some of those properties in number 2, if you don't know the natural log of 1 is 0, that's going to hurt for a couple weeks. So You need to ask why that's the case if that's what you missed. Okay, so which ones can I help with?
On form A, question 6, I mean C.
6C?
I thought maybe it wouldn't work.
Okay. So log base 2 of 2x squared minus 3 equals log, or sorry, log base 5. This one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so again, we'll get into more complex equation solving, but there's really 3 things you need to be able to do to solve equations. One is be able to simplify, like with some of the log properties like we did in question 2. If you did that on part A, you're done, and half of part B. Switching from logarithmic form to exponential form or exponential form to logarithmic form is how you finish part B. And then in C, the only other equation type we expect you to be able to do right now is if one side has log base of something and the other side has log base of something, those two sides are already balanced out, so you just need to make sure that the insides, what you're taking the log of, is balanced out. Now, other than one thing at the end of this question, logarithms are already finished. And depending on how you move forward from this could be a big red flag for you guys. If you're moving on to calculus next year or college algebra next year and you're not solving a quadratic correctly, that's going to be painful. You need to know how to solve a quadratic. Everything needs to be on one side set equal to 0. Any other kind of creative thing that you're trying to pull off, that doesn't work like that. And to solve a quadratic, you can always use quadratic formula if you want to. Obviously, we hope that it factors, but if you don't factor it right, then it doesn't matter if you understand the rest of this question, unfortunately. And that's the same thing. College algebra, you're going to be factoring even more than calculus. And that's not something that we get to just stop and reteach. We got too much new stuff. You guys are to that point of high enough mathematics that you've got to be able to do this. So I did it with guess and check here real quick, but remember, minus 3 plus 2, yeah. Remember, we also talked about that product sum method, or you may have learned something else in Algebra 2. So I don't care how you factor, but you need to make sure you factor correctly. I saw a few factorings where you guys didn't put a 2 there. If you don't put a 2 here, x times x is only x squared, not 2x squared. Foil it together and make sure that it works. Now, the only other part of this that was logarithms is, unfortunately, with log equations, one or both of these could be extraneous. Not because I factored wrong, not because I solved this wrong, not because I solved my quadratic wrong, not because my first step is wrong. But in the convenience of doing this first step, we have created what's possibly an extraneous solution. So you actually have to plug it into the original problem, and if you plug 3 over 2 in, you get log base 5 of 3 over 2, if you simplify that, equals log base 5 of 3 over 2, and that's great. Left side equals right side, and there's nothing wrong with that one. But if you plug in -1, you're going to have log base 5 of -1 equals log base 5 of -1. And at a quick glance, it doesn't look like anything's wrong there. The left equals the right. But there's no power of 5 that's ever going to give you 0 or -1. You cannot take the log of 0. You cannot take the log of -1. This one was extraneous, and you should not have kept it. You cannot keep it and be correct. And that's really the only piece of logarithm to that question, other than thinking about how this part's already balanced out. So yeah, it's a little bit longer of a question, but you guys certainly need to be able to solve quadratics. I think we'll probably try to spend one day on quadratics before the year's out, but very important. And factoring is very important too. But we've already spent one day on factoring together, so I don't know if we'll have any more time for just factoring. Okay, was that enough? You found your error? Okay. Anybody else that was going to ask about this one need to ask anything more specific? Okay, any others from 3.2 quiz? I'm thinking we should have just tested today. I don't have very many questions. Okay. That is fine, but you still have a large chunk of time here. You've got about 55 minutes. So unless you actually think you're ready to take the test, use that 55 minutes to study, and that way you don't have to do it later. And that way, if you happen to stumble upon something you want some clarification on, of course, I am still happy to help you while you're here. So please move forward from that. But the two things you really need to look at to make sure you're prepared for the test is review those 3 quizzes. Anything you missed, make sure you know why and be ready to answer those question types. And review the test review, but only questions 1 through 9 and question 11. I don't know how relevant this is, but I did have 2 people take it early yesterday because they're going to be gone next week, the day of their test for V-Day. And neither one of them aced their quizzes, any of the 3 quizzes, and they both aced the test. The test is very manageable, but they did do the test review, and I know that they're the type that they did study some, so it is certainly a good one to try to capitalize on because it's not that much material. So all right, well, that's all I got for you. So again, please make sure you're prepared for that. This will be a 50-point test. It will go in the major category of your grade, which I think you only have 2 assignments for right now, which was like a 30-point law of sines, law of cosines quiz, which was very good for most people, and then a 50-point limits test, which was mixed. Just depends on the person. But this would be, I think, only your 3rd major assignment in the grade book. So that can be very good or potentially bad, depending on how you do in comparison to those others. But please let me know how I can help.